for this important discussion of the energy legislation that the Joint Telecommunications, Energy, and Utilities Committee is going to hear next Tuesday at 1 p.m. in Gardner Auditorium. And in order to help, I'll just say we at the Global Warming Solutions Project are very excited that, I'm personally excited that MassPower Forward has done such a great job of organizing all that wonderful grassroots effort across the state, and that we have a chance this evening to kind of both describe to you some of the energy choices that are ahead of us, and also the Global Warming Solutions Project Energy Resources Plan, which the organizers here, along with a number of other groups, have spent the last 9 months or so putting together, and so we're looking forward to putting that forward. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and from MassPower Forward, and I also want to thank my co-presenters here, Heather Klisch from the Appalachian Mountain Club, Amy Boyd from the Acadia Center, and Caitlin Peel-Sloan from the Conservation Law Foundation. All of these folks are a great resource, and we hope that tonight is just the first part of a longer collaboration and a chance to connect. So before I get into the actual substance of the presentation, we had a few quick logistical questions. Heather, do you mind moving to the overview?
For logistics, you mean?
Well, I'll just talk through logistics first.
Okay.
First, I sent along a we've created a side-by-side comparison of what the GWSP Energy Resources Plan that you'll hear about later in the presentation, but just to save us some time and to provide some good background information, we put together a quick comparison of our plan with some of the major legislation that will be heard on Tuesday, and so that will be available to you. I did send it to the MassPower Forward planning list earlier, but we'll make sure that you can do that, and it will allow you to kind of follow along, but also to dig in later on each individual bill. We can skip some time going through each bill rather than giving an overview, because they're very broad and in-depth. The second thing is that we're keeping everyone, because there's a great group of attendees. We have about, looks like about 20 folks joining us tonight. We're going to keep everyone on mute for and hold questions during the presentation, and then at the end we'll have those folks please try to use the hand raise function on your GoToWebinar, and we'll try to answer your questions and take you off mute. In the meantime, on the GoToWebinar presentation, there's a questions section, and just so that if you have questions as you go along, please go ahead and type your question, and that way we can seek to answer that at the end. And if we don't answer that, if we aren't able to have time in this hour to answer that, we'll find a way to get back to you. We have your contact information. We'll have our contact information at the end, and we'll plan to follow up. That's all of that. Yeah, that's great. So let's start. So just in tonight's presentation, we're going to have a quick overview of our energy supply picture in Massachusetts and why the energy legislation to be heard on Tuesday is so important to our Commonwealth's future and the future of the climate. We're going to talk a little bit about that legislation, just to kind of give you an overview of what we see as the key bills to be heard on next Tuesday. We'll talk about some of those, what we see as some of the shortcomings and problems we see with the legislation, and then we'll talk, finally go through our energy resources plan, summarize that, and then open it up for questions. Next slide. So I'm wanting to show you here that I think everyone here is pretty familiar with the fact that we've gone over the last decade from a system where we had a lot of nuclear and coal to one where we're very dependent upon natural gas for our electricity supply. And that so we've seen that shift over time, and it's increasingly causing problems not only for the climate, but in terms of volatility and price. The 44% number is actually is New England wide. Thanks to Caitlin for putting this slide together. But it shows that we're over-reliant on natural gas. And if you look at the numbers for renewable energy at 9%, the plan that we're envisioned that we're putting forth would put us on a path towards a much greater level of local renewable energy. And our hope is to push more towards 40% renewables in the next decade from about 10% today. I also think this slide is important because it kind of frames the context for the decisions that our policymakers plan to make. We have seen calls, and we know that there are actions that the administration, the Baker administration, and others are taking to try to bring on natural gas pipeline capacity because we end up having this winter energy price challenge. We also know the governor plans to wants to bring down new hydropower resources, and this means that we have the state's planning to spend about $10 billion or more on energy infrastructure. And our challenge and I think Mass Power Forward's challenge, is to find a way to make sure that all those billions of dollars are consistent with our state's climate goals under the Global Warming Solutions Act, and also making sure that we can reduce our dependence upon natural gas for electricity rather than more dependent. Next slide.
Next one after that? Or do you want to talk about this one further?
Sure. So I'll just say that the Acadia Center has done some great work with their a report that that's their Energy Vision report, looking at both our energy and transportation choices and how we can meet the very aggressive and important greenhouse gas reduction goals for our state.
Sorry, Josh, I missed my cue.
Sorry.
I can take over if you like.
Yeah.
So what this shows, this is actually New England-wide, but it is the same sort of proportions as Massachusetts. And we just sort of, as a thought experiment, converted, if we were to convert all gasoline vehicles to electric and all fossil fuel heated buildings, homes and businesses, to electric overnight, that would be a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases. And then we can further achieve the significant reductions by 2050 that the various states' climate plans are calling for by adding more renewables to the grid. The current RPS standards, again, New England-wide, take us down to about half of that. And then if we were to get to about 75% renewable, that would get us to the 80% reductions by 2050.
Great. So on Tuesday, the hearing notice just went out actually today, but so I think there are about 8 or 9 bills that are being heard on Tuesday, but we wanted to sort of break down what we see are the key bills and the ones that are very likely to be the ones that are in strong consideration by the House and the Senate as the fall moves along. And I won't presume that that Mass Power Forward or your organization should limit your comments to these. I also don't think that you need to know all of the substance in depth of each one to make a strong case. But for reference, these proposals are the major ones that are going to be heard. The first is Senator Downing's S1757, which is an act relative to clean energy resources. Representative Haddad's H2881, an act to promote energy diversity. Governor Baker has S1965, which is focused on really only on bringing down hydropower from Canada. And there's also separately, the governor has a solar bill, H3724. So solar and net metering will also be part of the discussion on Tuesday. And just to, again, the key elements here are a very large procurement of hydropower resources, largely from Canada via transmission. Pat Haddad is making a strong case and strong push for developing offshore wind. Her bill also includes an incentive which we opposed for tariffs, for expanding gas pipeline capacity. And then Senator Downing's bill has an element that we support, which would be to boost the RPS. So those are the main bills. The side-by-side comparison that we'll make available sort of helps break down some of the elements in more depth. And I'll leave it to Caitlin to talk a little more about shortcomings.
All right, so we're kind of looking at all of these bills that are on the table and some others that are not noticed for this hearing as what could be the universe of provisions that might go into one single omnibus bill. And looking at the bills from that frame, there are a number of problems with pretty much all of the filed bills, certainly the main ones that we focused on in the last slide. So from our perspective at the GWSP and the Clean Energy Resources subgroup that worked on this legislation, certainly, energy efficiency is our first cost, least cost, first resource. We should be investing more. We should be making sure that the utilities don't get to rest on the laurels of being, the best of a pretty mediocre system. And we need to make sure that we're investing more in energy efficiency and in other local energy resources like emerging technologies with storage, emerging sort of reorganization with microgrids to help make the grid overall more resilient, and more use of distributed generation, which can help with energy efficiency to reduce demand at specific times. And then we also see too much focus on imported hydro. There are high environmental impacts, and there are serious market impacts on the development of, cleaner renewables when you procure a third of our state's energy needs with hydro. And similarly, we are calling for a carve-out within the hydro procurement for RPS eligible, real renewables, but we also want a significant procurement of offshore wind to help develop that industry in Massachusetts and set up a future where we can be more dependent on resources where the fuel is free and clean, like wind. And that all generally goes together into meaning that we need a more diverse portfolio of energy. And we also have highlighted, and we'll be highlighting in our testimony, pieces of the bills that don't adequately protect ratepayers, customers in the Commonwealth, and that don't adequately protect the environment. And of course, the hot button topic right now, we should certainly be limiting or preventing unnecessary subsidies for gas pipeline capacity.
Great. This is Heather from AMC. Wanted to take just a minute to touch on a word about hydropower dams. This is the type of hydropower that was first proposed in the bill last summer, I should say summer 2014, and is the subject of the bills out there, including the Baker administration bills, is most likely for the quantities that we're talking about, imports of most likely Canadian hydro. And in the comprehensive package to propose something that is more diverse, a piece of that goal is to avoid the associated impacts with hydro, avoid procuring more of those associated impacts than we really need, in combination with all of the other cleaner renewable energy. So just touching on, and this is not news for many of you, the types of impacts from hydropower dams that we seek to minimize. One is that when dams are created, you get reservoirs in the back behind the dam, lower flows, except when the turbines are running, in the front part of the dam, if you will, the downstream part of the dam. Effects are, real briefly, fragmentation of habitat. Oftentimes, if there can't be fish passage, also conversion of habitat from, especially in the reservoir area, from the type of habitat that supports species that thrive in running water to species that better thrive in still water. Clearly, one of the things that clearly gets altered with hydropower dams is the flow, rather than running in a natural way with higher flows during certain conditions, during certain times of years. It's a manipulated flow, clearly. And what happens then is you get the altered flow affects the distribution of nutrients and sediments. Nutrients aren't flowing downstream as well as they should. Sediments aren't flowing downstream as well as they should. They're accumulating in different places. It affects the temperature and oftentimes associated water quality. You get a stratification of temperature behind the dam. So you get, I could go into detail, but I won't unless there are questions. But basically, you get cold water running during the summertime. You get warmer water running that's been held back in the reservoir, oftentimes in the fall. Is just one example. And then, of course, it changes the channel geomorphology. So you get scouring in the channel. You get higher, flashier flows than you would otherwise in a natural regime. Other impacts, aside from the ecological impacts that I just described, is that, of course, in fact, it impacts economic drivers, oftentimes associated with river systems, including recreation and fisheries. In some places, and this is the language here is most relevant to Canadian hydropower, you also get First Nations peoples displaced with large amounts of flooding. The next slide is just an illustration of the extent of flooding that happens with the type of hydropower we would be bringing in. And I want to qualify this, that this slide was created using Hydro-Quebec as an example. The type of hydro that would come in from Canada isn't necessarily limited to Hydro-Quebec, but that's the example that was pulled here. By way of example, in a comparison to Massachusetts, the geography that we're more familiar with, the Hydro-Quebec reservoirs currently today flood an area that is greater than 71% of Massachusetts. So that light blue area is the area of the total flooded area that is powering many parts of Canada and New England to date. The largest reservoir alone is 38 times larger than the Quabbin Reservoir. So if many of us are familiar with the Quabbin Reservoir. It's huge. The kind of I'm not even going to bother to say it right now because it's not rolling off my tongue, but it's a very, very large effect. You also get river flow diversions associated with hydropower projects. Imagine this, river flow diversions, again, from current Hydro-Quebec projects equate to diverting 488 times the flow of the Connecticut River as it is at the Connecticut-Massachusetts border, diverting that to an entirely different watershed. And we can imagine what that would do to well, to the water, the lower watershed in Connecticut and the effects on Long Island Sound. The last bullet there is giving a comparison to the volume of power that is called for in both the Baker administration bill and the current version of the Downing bill. That is 18.9 terawatt hours, which is about 2,200 megawatts of base capacity, would require a reservoir alone that is about 4.6 times our largest town, which is Plymouth. That's that darker blue area. That's the volume of flooding that would be required just for those current proposals.
Hi, this is Amy from Acadia Center. So this slide is for those of you who are a little more of a graphic learners. And this is from Acadia Center's Utility Vision report. This essentially brings together some of the points that Caitlin was raising in the slide that she went through about some of the shortcomings that we see in the primary bills that are up for discussion on Tuesday. Rather than more and more infrastructure and more natural gas, we see the view of the future as having a more diverse portfolio and bringing together distributed energy resources, large-scale renewable resources, and yes, some natural gas plants, and having a diverse supply of resources that we need. And then also integrating technologies such as demand response and energy efficiency, and keeping consumers really at the heart of the energy plan going forward.
So this is Josh from ELM. I want to provide just a quick overview of the context and in which we, the Global Warming Solutions Project, put together its energy resources plan. I think the bullets and the points of the overview, they stand for themselves, and I think Caitlin already did a very good job of kind of giving an overview of our asks. But first of all, our task is to make sure the state keeps its legal requirements, legally required greenhouse gas reductions under the Global Warming Solutions Act intact. And we have a goal of 25% reduction by 2020 and 80% by 2050. So bringing online energy resources and reducing energy demand are proven strategies and cost-effective strategies that have economic benefits. And so it's sort of that's sort of our sweet spot, and that's where we're going to continue to push. But we also saw some other things going on. Obviously, the challenge of natural gas infrastructure and how to reduce our reliance on that, knowing that there are a number of two major pipeline proposals in the works. How could we find a resource mix that would allow us to move beyond that? The second element I'll call out is in the last when Governor Patrick was still in office, there was a lot of dispute, and rightly so, about how much hydropower and how much transmission we should have. And we have it's great to have Caitlin, Heather, and Amy here because we both cover, are interested in not only the what's in the energy mix, the actual energy supply, but also the impacts of that on the landscape. So how could we seek to minimize the impact of any new procurement of large-scale energy resources on the environment and our cultural heritage in New England. The third element is that there is a very large, good, and strong push for new offshore wind resources. And we saw that there are a number of bills that would ask for a very large portion of hydropower and nothing for renewable energy. And it's our take that rather than, you'll probably hear this number, 18.9 terawatt hours, that's about a third of our energy supply. Rather than have all the resources go to come from hydropower, we wanted to change that mix so it would be both on a little bit of hydropower, but then prioritizing onshore and offshore wind. And there's a number of offshore wind companies that are moving aggressively into the Massachusetts market, and we'd like to take advantage of that resource not only for its carbon benefits, for its economic benefits. And so again, this is definitely a compromise proposal, but it's one that's also an aggressive one and a realistic one. And so we plan to present this as a group on next Tuesday, and we're doing outreach. We feel like it's kind of a really good plan that can keep us in line with our climate goals. And so with that, I'll move on.
We're back to me.
Yes.
So this is the, we have 4 primary tenets that we're going to run through tonight with y'all. And so as we know, the energy efficiency programs in Massachusetts are ranked #1 in the nation. But I think more important than that, they deliver billions of dollars in benefits to Massachusetts ratepayers every year and allow the economy to grow while reducing our emissions and also energy costs for customers. The Green Communities Act did a great job setting up the efficiency programs. And what we want to do in our bill is just really strengthen that to go after all cost-effective energy efficiency. So our bill would hold electric and gas utilities as well as the DPU accountable for really figuring out what that number is for all cost-effective, which means that it's cheaper to go get efficiency than it is to go get more supply, build another power plant, or go get some hydro from Canada. And then really figure out what that number is and then go after that in the efficiency programs. And then it would also expand the efficiency and renewable energy and alternate energy portfolios, open those up to municipal light plant customers. The way it is now, muni customers may be able to opt in, but if their muni decides to opt in, this would actually fully bring them into the program, have some of their dollars contribute to the programs, but also have all those billions of dollars of benefits go to muni customers as well. You can move to the next slide. The second tenet is modernizing our energy grid and promoting local energy resources. So solar has definitely taken off in Massachusetts, and energy efficiency also very effective. However, these local energy resources and other ones that are coming on in future years, like energy storage and demand response, are not able to compete with traditional utility infrastructure expenditures. So if a utility is going to spend money on transmission or distribution upgrades, like a new substation, we would like to see if a cheaper option is out there to invest more in storage, efficiency, demand response, solar in that neighborhood, and actually get the power at that local area rather than spending probably more money on upgrading a substation. So this would also require DOER to set targets for cost-effective deployment of energy storage. That is the same language as in Senator Downing's energy storage bill, which is not actually before the committee on Tuesday, and allow local energy resources to compete, as I've sort of explained. And then also prevent any increase in regressive fixed charges on customer bills, which is a policy that utilities have played with to go after customers putting more solar on their roof and being able to sort of negate the money they would be paying for supporting the grid through net metering, because net metering is the full retail rate. They claim that they're not paying their fair share.
All right, it's Caitlin again from CLS. I think I spoke pretty comprehensively about this when we were pointing out the downsides of the proposed bill, because this is really the section that gets at the big topics that are going to be on the table on Tuesday. You know, Massachusetts really has a burgeoning clean energy sector, and we want to keep that going so that people both can transition in host communities from fossil generation and other dirty sources of power to clean energy jobs that help our climate goals and help grow our economy in Massachusetts. So we are supporting raising the net metering caps immediately, and I think, as Amy was discussing a little bit, making sure that we're getting we have an aggressive target in place to help grow the solar industry. And then we're also looking to, on any big hydropower contracting process, we want to make sure 30% of that at least is from RPS eligible energy sources. And that is sort of a proportion that's based on the capacity factor for onshore wind. And so we're not picking and choosing or endorsing any particular project, but in an ideal world, some really attractive projects involve bringing hydro and wind over the same transmission line, which has a really high capacity factor altogether. It's really great for reliability and helps bring along burgeoning industries like wind. And then we are also firmly supporting the first section in Senator Downing's bill, which proposes to increase the rate at which the RPS increases every year, to double that from 1% to 2%. And that will, Mass Energy has a great slide that we used at the spring hearings for TUE and that we can share if anyone's interested, showing how increasing the RPS could get us to a minimum of 40% of electricity supplied with renewables by 2030. And then, as we spoke about before, we're looking for an aggressive target for procuring offshore wind capacity, because first, that's investing in a local industry, and second, that's making an investment in a long-term investment in a generating source where the fuel is free, and that's going to pay for itself over time. The more we can wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, the better it will be for ratepayers in the long run.
Okay. Another element of the package that we're proposing is a piece of the package that's out there, and especially with the hydro procurement, and ideally we hope the wind and other RPS eligible power that Caitlin was talking about is, of course, is a procurement of transmission, which is kind of a different way of going about it, where transmission is oftentimes driven by reliability and a requirement that transmission be built for reliable power. This is, of course, transmission to bring in cleaner power, so it would be allowed to be part of the contracting package. So that alone is a new thing. Going along with this, we're proposing that Massachusetts essentially use its purchasing power for this type of energy to drive strong management practices with transmission proposals. One key piece, and I was just talking about overhead transmission, but one key piece is, of course, for gas transmission, is to prohibit public subsidies or tariffs for any new gas pipeline capacity. So prohibit the public to be charged for natural gas that we really don't want, we think we really don't need. Another component is to place robust environmental practices for new overhead transmission investments, ideally to bury lines, following a very well practiced hierarchy, if you will, of avoiding impacts, especially to resources of regional and state significance, avoiding them, minimizing the impacts, and if that can't be done, mitigating them well, as has been done with the power line that's coming through Vermont. And then, of course, to require an independent, rigorous review of contracts to prevent self-dealing by the utilities. That's something that is missing in the projects that are out there, in the bills that are out there. The idea that utilities can can craft the contract specs, et cetera, and have a strong hand in how those get reviewed, is something we want to put up a bit of a firewall there.
All right, so I took, this is Caitlin again, I took a stab at just pulling out the bottom line points. You know, there's going to be a lot of testimony on Tuesday, and as Josh said, we're certainly not suggesting, we're not trying to help, you know, tell Mass Power Forward folks what to testify about, but we just wanted to highlight the pieces that we're going to be really promoting. First of all, to get the solar net metering caps raised as quickly as possible, and raised much higher than the governor's bill. And then also to ensure that our solar programs recognize the value of solar over the long term, which the governor's bill does not do and is actually pretty hostile to the solar industry and the value of solar. And then, again, that we can't buy massive amounts of hydro without also helping, you know, cleaner and more renewable energy come along, and without also ensuring that we're protecting the region's landscape. There's no reason for Massachusetts to be using our major purchasing power to bring along the worst possible transmission or hydro projects. And of course, we can't incentivize new natural gas infrastructure, and our clean energy future in Mass depends on getting these bills right. And so we're not just here before the TUE talking about these concepts in a void. We're highlighting the fact that all of the bills as filed have major flaws, and we want to be part of a conversation moving forward, but there's a lot of work that would need to be done before we could endorse these bills.
All right. So that's all that that's our presentation, and we'll make sure that we share our contact information if you don't have it already. But I think we'd like to go ahead and open it up for some questions and discussion, so that if folks have questions about what's going on Tuesday and just, you know, the landscape on the hearing, or elements of the existing bills, or the GOWSP Energy Resources Plan, we have 15 minutes or so to go through some of those things, and I would want to hear how we can be helpful.
And this is where, if you have questions, it really does work that if you write in a question, we can see it, or even if you just say, I have a question, we can unmute you so you can ask the question of the whole group.
Heather, I have a question from Adele Franks.
Oh, wonderful. Here, I'll unmute you, Adele. Adele, we can hear you.
Oh, good. I'm wondering, for those of us who plan to testify, if you recommend that we highlight the flaws of the current bills that are under discussion, or if we should highlight the fact that we need a comprehensive bill that would include all the best features of the current bills and not the flaws.
This is Caitlin. You know, I'd say both are valid points to raise with the committee. I think raising targeted things that you disagree with the specific bills before the committee can be helpful, you know, can be helpful to the committee when they're thinking about what to do next. I think it's also very important that they hear a drumbeat, certainly in general, in favor of solar, in support of solar, in totally against natural gas subsidization. But I think it's valuable to highlight the flaws of the current bills, because they really are all, I think the governor's bill is the most well-baked at this point. The Senate and House bills are, and that's in terms of how it's written. The Senate and House bills are both very kind of in draft form, kind of filed as placeholders, and so it's important for committee members to know what's really objectionable.
Yeah, I would add to that, and I see a couple more questions coming in. I would add to that, to echo a bit of what Caitlin said, that I think it is good first of all, when you're speaking, it's good to speak to the bills, to speak about perhaps the flaws, but it's always good to make recommendations and to highlight the things that you think might be important. So another item you might want to talk about, or another kind of overview ask that you might want to talk about, in addition to what Caitlin just said, is a diverse mix of resources. If it's important to you, using what we have locally first, focusing on energy efficiency, using what we have locally to even reduce what we need to import, if that suits you. But focusing on some of those recommendations always helps, and that's why I pulled up that bottom line piece as well. Another way you might phrase that, for instance, might be, you know, to foster the strong economy and additional potential we have for renewables right here in this state and here in New England.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. You know, that saying that purchasing large amounts of hydropower is inadequate, you know, as an energy strategy and as a way to deal with our climate commitments, you know, is very important. I would also highlight, as Caitlin said, the net metering element as something that the legislature should do now. They've been hearing that, and they need to continue to hear that. And Adele, I know that you have some, you know, you're a retired public health professional, and I think, you know, for you in particular, hearing that message is a good one, an important one for them to hear.
Thanks.
Okay. Another couple of questions. Somebody missed the first 5 minutes of the presentation. Oh, I feel like I'm getting an echo now. And missed, and was wanting to know if the slideshow will be made available. We're recording it, and it will be made available. This is new to me, running a webinar, so I'm not sure exactly the format that it will be available, but it will be available.
Yeah, we'll certainly get the slides out.
Yeah. Somebody else has asked, can you explain low carbon hydro? Is there high carbon hydro, and how is that defined? That's a good question, and Caitlin and I might be able to tag team on it. My first, oh, go ahead, Caitlin.
I know my basic spiel is that it all depends on how a reservoir is created, because when you dam a river and flood a reservoir, you are both getting rid of a huge carbon sink, and also you're decomposing a massive amount of trees that do release methane emissions. And there have been studies showing the magnitude of that, which can be up to 70% of the carbon emissions of a new natural gas plant over the first 10 years of the life of the reservoir. And so that just leads us to see, you know, it's better to use existing reservoirs rather than incentivize new ones, and all reservoirs aren't created equally. And so that's why it's really important for us, with our Massachusetts buying power, to be putting a thumb on the scale for reservoirs that use best management practices.
I will add on to that, that very good differentiation, that language that we do see is is clean hydro, and there is a difference between better and worse hydro, and even the parsing out of what qualifies for Massachusetts renewable portfolio standard, something that qualifies as truly renewable hydropower. Meets certain low impact requirements, definitions of low impact. So managing habitat, having decent flow regimes, having basically protections for recreation, fish passage and protecting certain endangered species. Large hydro can be low impact hydro. So it's oftentimes easy to say, oh, well, just small hydro is low impact. Small hydro can be very high impact. Large hydro can be lower impact. So what we are also after is trying to get if Massachusetts is purchasing more power than we really can generate in the form of hydro in our state, going after truly the overall cleanest stuff rather than just defining it all as clean.
Can I just add one quick thing? This isn't directly in response to Irvine's question, but I think it's important to note that, you know, among our groups that in the Global Warming Solutions Project, that, you know, hydropower is not something that on its own we want to sanction. It is a technology that's mature and is from Canada, where it's subsidized by the government. But the transmission lines that would be sanctioned would allow us to potentially bring on that wind that Caitlin and Heather have talked about beforehand, that's some of which is in northern Maine. And it's one of the more near-term sources of truly renewable technology in our region. And so that's where the 30% requirement comes from. So there is an opportunity there, and hydropower could back up that wind power, but it's the wind power that is our main interest, not the hydropower.
And I would just add quickly to clarify something I said before. As you know, we're not picking winners and losers of projects. Some are, as proposed, are better than others right now, but they all could meet the standards that we've proposed.
Right. Thank you.
We just need to have that language in the bill to help make sure that they have to meet it.
Yes, well said. The next question is from Emily Kirkland, who says, I have a question. So Emily, I just unmuted you, so you should be able to ask it.
Great. So this is a question about the 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind. I was hoping you could just clarify how that interacts with the RPS. And sorry if you said this and I missed it, but is there a carve out for offshore wind, or is that like separate from the RPS? If you can just clarify that, that would be helpful. Or is that just a goal and not a requirement?
Okay, so it's a requirement. We're asking for a carve out from, and sorry if the term carve out brought up visions of the RPS. We're asking for a carve out from a procurement standpoint for offshore wind. I think generally offshore wind would, you know, generate RECs, RPS eligible credits. But it is one of our talking points that it's not sufficient just to have the RPS program, because generators in new, certainly in new industries like onshore and offshore wind and solar, need a steadier supply of income in order to get their projects financed, and especially the transmission when that's needed to get that financed. So we're looking for a carve-out in the procurement sense for offshore wind. We're not looking to change offshore wind's role in the RPS itself.
Got it.
Yeah.
Let me just add to that
Yeah.
We do see this, and this is a good reason why this is a comprehensive package, because all these pieces fit together. And so we would want to see a doubling of the RPS so that the additional offshore wind coming on doesn't, to really torture the metaphor, flood the RPS market with lots of frac. So it's all interlinked, certainly.
By the way, if you do, for anyone testifying on Tuesday, we're not supposed to make too many flood metaphors. So
yeah, I wouldn't use the term.
We were told that. It was appropriate, however, this evening.
that might be an irritant. The next question, Daniel is asking, are there any other bills under consideration at the hearing particularly likely to be included in the final legislation? There are, we just got, not we, everybody, the list was just published today of the bills that would be heard, and there are 11 bills. So we touched on 4, 3 or 4? 3 of 4.
4.
We did touch on 4. I'm sorry, I'm already losing track. So there are 7 others. So one of them, for instance, by Cabral, also is related to offshore wind energy. Do any of you want to speak to the other ones that are being heard?
Yeah. So I would say, Cabral's bill would probably be folded into the conversation because it's similar to the provision in Representative Haddad's bill. I think for the rest of them, certainly from the conversations we've had with legislative leaders, I think you'd have to handicap it based on the power of the bill's sponsors to add something as an amendment or to pull something into the omnibus conversation in committee. Like Senator Pacheco's bill maybe, is relatively minor in the scheme of the other things that are being talked about, certainly in its notoriety. I don't think anyone's really targeting it at this point, but Senator Pacheco has a lot of sway and power, so his bill may get in.
So the titles of those, for instance, there's an act relative to consumer choice of green electricity, an act authorizing borrowing by cities and towns at 0% for green energy sources to borrow from the Commonwealth. Pacheco's bill is an act relative to bonding authority for the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. There's a bill to create a green bank to promote clean energy in Massachusetts. So there are some interesting ones. The pieces, CUSAC also has a bill, an act relative to clean energy resources. Those ones that we were talking about today are the ones most likely to be rolled up into an omnibus bill. And what we are suggesting, and that relates to this piece right here, what we are suggesting isn't a wholesale new different package, but it's taking pieces of legislation that have been proposed, including some that are not being heard by this committee. For instance, there's one from Representative Smizik on energy efficiency, improving those bills as with our recommendations that we see fit, and in fact augmenting them to be what we feel is a more robust package for our energy sourcing and overall environmental protections and consumer protections. I cannot forget that.
Okay.
Are there other questions? That was the last question that had been written in, or does anybody, there's this little nifty little hand icon that you can, if you don't feel like writing a question, feel free to raise it and you can ask a question. Okay.
I guess, I know we have, this is Caitlin again, I know we have Josh as one of our presenters, but I don't know if any of our other participants, like Claire and Joel, who I know are instrumental in Mass Power Forward, have any other wrap-up thoughts or comments on things we should clarify.
You're both now unmuted if you want to talk. Not to put you on the spot.
But you helped bring this group together.
Yeah, we want to thank you. Okay.
No? Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. Here's something from, I apologize if I don't know how to say your name. Irvine, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say thank you. This was really a helpful event. And I also very much appreciated the cheat sheets that Josh sent out earlier.
Thanks,
That's
Ravine.
Terrific.
Yeah.
And Joel does thank me, but he doesn't have a mic. So
yes.
Joel and Claire were instrumental in putting this together. So thank them for helping to host this. I think with that we can wrap for tonight. But we will make the we'll make sure we have everyone. I have everyone's contact information We'll gather the questions, and we'll make sure everyone has the slides. And again, thanks to Heather, we have recorded this, and when we find an appropriate way of sharing it, either through the MassDOT R4 website or via our individual our listserv, we can make sure to get it out so that others who weren't able to attend tonight can view it. And in the meantime, feel free to come back to us with questions either prior to, it's going to be a little crazy for all of us prior to Tuesday, but we will, if we can't talk to you before then, we'll catch you after the hearing. And thank you for everyone for coming out.
And there has, Josh, there has been a request for the cheat sheets to be sent out, and so I just suggested we send out the cheat sheets again with the overall slides to this group. And Adele is asking, will the recording be sent to those who tried to register but couldn't? Oh dear, I hope there weren't folks who couldn't register. I don't know, we could probably send it out to the same list that got the invitation if you all feel that's appropriate.
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's great.
Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you all.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Okay,
All
thanks
right.
everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.